this talk is basically about what PyScript is mainly for people who may heard about the name but not really don't know what's going on and why we can now write Python on on HTML, whatever, like what's going on there. So it's a brief introduction of what PyScript is. I would also point you to the direction of where you can find more resources if you want to dive deeper or try it for yourself and things like that. So also PyScript is like still a quite young project. It's developing very, very fast. As you will see like later that we have to, when we try it, we have to be more careful because some of the how to do things, some of the APIs may change quite drastically from version to version, which is very common to all these new projects. So, bear that in mind. And sometimes, it's a little bit of hurdle that you have to get through, but once you get through, it's actually a lot of fun to play around with PyScript. So yeah, this slide contains all the information of finding me. I'm also on Mastodon as well as all these other social media. You can find me there. So Mastodon is the same handle as Twitter. So yeah, I would also share the link of the slides later. Let's go if I can. Okay, so I'm Cheuk, and since this is recorded, I'm just going to quickly go over what I've just said before the start of the talk. So I'm contributing to multiple open source projects. So I contribute the most, I think, in Hypothesis, but I also, just like, contribute to any project that I get a chance to contribute to. I've also organized multiple events from conferences to maybe some events that try to teach people Python, like absolute beginner Python. I was on the US Python Society board for 2 years, and also I am the Python Software Foundation Fellow. So thank you very much for trusting me. Thanks the community for trusting me. I'm looking for my next role at the moment, which I'm very free right now. I can have a lot of time for the community, which is great. So yeah, so PyScript, I don't know how many of you have heard of PyScript? So because PyScript was basically announced last year in PyCon US, and I think that is kind of like, went viral, and a lot of people, especially young people, because it looks really fun. So that's why they kept sharing like, oh, PyScript is really cool. Now you can code, write some games or write some fun application and things. So in Fabio's keynote that he gave in PyCon Colombia a few days ago, he also bring a Lego thing that have a motor, and you can actually control it using PyScript, which is super cool. There's another demo by his team. Also, someone use PyScript to control Tesla to make some noises, so to annoy the neighbor, I guess. So yeah, PyScript can do a lot of things. But to understand PyScript, we first have to understand what is WASM. So to explain things a little bit better, I would always draw this analogy between your computer and a web browser. So normally, let's look at it this way. So if you write Python code in your computer, like you normally do, maybe let's assume it's not Jupyter Notebook, because Jupyter Notebook is another thing. So imagine you are just in your terminal, you have already installed Python and type Python, enter. You will have a space to a repo, we call it, to write Python code. Or if you have a script that's written in Python, python.py, and then you can use Python, type Python, and then type the name of the file to run it in Python. So what's going on there, right? So the Python installed on your computer is probably CPython. So CPython is the standard version of Python. It's written in C. It's hosted on python.org, so you can download it from there. So if we go our journey from Python, go deeper into how your computer can execute Python code. So first of all, your Python code will be interpreted by the CPython itself, right? So CPython is actually an interpreter of interpreting your Python code. After that, it will interpret into C code that come with CPython, and then all these different it's almost like a puzzle that so within CPython there's a lot of different pieces that is actually written in C, and it could compile. So your code, after interpreted by the CPython into okay, whatever it should be represented in C code, and then it will trigger all this compiled C code to run. So these compiled C codes is actually machine code. So machine code is a code that the machine understand. Is super difficult to write. I don't know if any of you have tried it. For example, if you study some computer science or some related engineering major, that maybe you have come across courses that you have to write machine code. It's not fun to write. It's not as nice as Python, as easy to understand, but your computer can only understand this machine code. And your computer, actually, the brain of your computer is the CPU chip, right? So the whole journey from Python code to the CPU chip is go through all this journey, okay? So now imagine we replicate this journey, but instead of going all the way to your CPU chip that run on your computer, we actually go to a virtual machine on the web browser. So there are multiple steps that need to be taken. So first of all, you have write Python code. For example, like PyScript, you use PyScript, you write Python code on HTML file. So the default for PyScript is actually using PyIodide. So PyLadies is basically like C Python for your computer, but it's for the web version. So PyLadies will interpret your Python code into some code. So this code is actually WASM. So WASM, the full name is WebAssembly code. So it's because machine code, we usually call it assembly code. So the WebAssembly code, as the name suggests, is the assembly code for the web virtual machine. So it goes the journey. So you also need the compiler. So instead of the C compiler, we have something called Mscripton. So this is all this stuff that if you kind of go into like this PyScript and WASM, Python WASM space, we heard all these terms all the time. So this is what they are, right? So this is the page that the kind of like comparison of how Python go from you writing Python code to either your computer, your chip is executing those code, or the web browser is actually executing those code on the web browser virtual machine. So it's quite important to remember that all these actually happen in a web browser virtual machine, because a lot of very interesting behavior of PyScript is because it's different from your computer. It's the browser virtual machine. So that's why it's different. We will come across those later. So, okay, now go back to PyScript. So what is PyScript? It's super complicated. Like, oh, I'm now running code on my browser. So PyScript is originally there is a framework. I think now because the idea of how this like tool is progressing, I think is more closer to a platform, which again, like Fabio explained, is that like, because a platform you can have you can plug in different things, it's more flexible, and so it's like even better than a framework. So that's why now they said that they are platform. So it lets you to run Python application in the browser. So like I said, it kind of help you to go through the journey from Python code into the web browser machine. So this is how like PyScript kind of enable you to do. It's not to replace JavaScript, but I think at the beginning, when people heard of PyScript, they kind of think that, oh, is it just like, now we don't have to write JavaScript. You will write less JavaScript, but it depends on your application. Sometimes you still have to do some, something that JavaScript do, and lots of times, there are JavaScript object that got passed into your Python code and you interact with it. So so it just kind of give you an option to write less JavaScript, but more Python, and also use the Python library that we know and love, which is amazing. So like I said, because all these like driver at the back is actually PyLadies and WASM, and also Mscripton and all these projects that enable PyScript to be able to do all these crazy things. So it's a community effort. It's an open source effort. It's not just the content now PyScript and it's just like it's built on all these like community effort. So there are many popular packages of Python available. So that's why it's better to use PyScript than JavaScript in many situations. For example, you have some machine learning things you want to do, right? I know there is TensorFlow.js, but have you tried TensorFlow.js? It's super difficult to do. Like even Python, a lot of people don't use TensorFlow directly, right? They use Keras or something else that, make it easier. So without those like popular Python packages, a lot of things are super difficult to do in JavaScript. So that's why I think PyScript really have the potential, and that's why it's something that is getting more and more popular. So this is some like example of how a PyScript script look like, how is to use PyScript. There are actually a tutorial that I would also show you the link later, that would be more like a hands-on guide, like step by step how to build your first application. But this is just a briefly like touching the surface here. So for example, here you see that this is a HTML page. Because I know it's quite dark here, but if you see the whole script, actually it's just an HTML script with all these HTML tag that you may or may not be familiar with, but don't worry. There's a way to learn how all this stuff, but I want to point out that to use PyScript in this HTML page, so these two lines are basically, the line that enable you to write Python script, right? So what it does is that the first line 3 here is actually pulling a style sheet. So for those of you who have done some HTML experience before, you would also a lot of time work with a style sheet, which is like the CSS styles sheet that's just like kind of make your web page look prettier. So like, for example, each element, how should they look like? What color background should they use? What color of border or what font size should they use? So this is the style sheet. So why do we have to use the style sheet for PyScript? Actually, the reason being because PyScript will also provide a repo for you, which we will hopefully see later, that so that is just like a thing that will let you kind of put in some Python script and then shift enter, and then it will get executed. But that little widget, we want it to look consistent. That's why there's like a PyScript.css provided. So you just link it like this. It's hosted on PyScript.net. So another thing that is needed is to put in the PyScript source code itself. So this is not the source code of PyScript, like to say it is like a already packaged version. So you just need to put in this like PyScript.js here. With again, it's hosted on PyScript.net. You just like put it in like this. Like normally, if you just do some other traditional like web development, you would maybe have some JavaScript script that you put in. But now we're putting in. Actually, this is not a JavaScript. It's like it's just the extension is .js. It's actually there's some TypeScript in there if you pick inside it, but it's different. But just do this, just put it in here, and then it will work. Okay, so don't overthink it. So after that, you can write some Python code. So what we need to use is this PyScript tag. I think now, I don't know whether we still use this output equals to port here anymore. I think because, again, PyScript is updating very fast. So yeah, but the idea is that within this pair of PyScript tag, inside everything is interpreted as Python. So all these are Python code. So import, this example needs to be updated because now this won't work. I just discovered a few days ago that now how Matplotlib works with PyScript is a little bit different now. But anyways, I just want to show you that you write Python code within the PyScript tag. This is what it is. And besides that, you also will have a tag that's called pyconfig. So pyconfig is actually quite important when you are developing PyScript code because it allows you to, for example, add in extra packages. So this, I would always say, is like pip install. So remember, we have the virtual machine, right? So we have, so for example, I want to use NumPy in my PyScript. So in your machine, you have to pip install, right? Pip install NumPy, and then, it would go to PyPI and get all these wheels of NumPy there to your computer, and now you can use NumPy. But when you have a web browser, so every time you refresh a page, so let's say you clear all the cache and you refresh the page, then it's empty. The virtual machine is empty. There's nothing there. So what you have to do is to pip install NumPy. But of course, we don't pip install because it's the web. It's not your computer. So what we have to do is to specify what dependency you need in the pyconfig tag. So by doing that, actually, when it got run, PyScript will automatically do the installation for you. Then NumPy will be available for you. So that's the idea. So this is how, it's like HTML file, just like any web page. If you right click and view source, you would see, all the source code of HTML. So this is basically HTML file. So I added this slide because, like I said, PyScript is developing very, very fast. Sometimes, things will not work anymore. So if you want to make sure that it works, for example, like I said, the matplotlib thing is changed already. So if you want to make sure that your application, like if will still work even if there's new version of PyScript got released, you can pin the version like this. I just put the releases, so there. I don't know whether this is still updated. Maybe there will be new versions already available. So you can look for the newest version. It should be in the documentation, and then you can just pin the version, so you don't have to every time I rerun it and it doesn't work, I have to fix it because it got updated. So this is better. So or there's another way. If you are developing a web application or using Django, then maybe you would prefer to host it yourself with the rest of your resources, your static resources, with your whole web application. You can, of course, download and host it. I think if you go to the GitHub repo, you can download all these things that they hosted on this link here. And then you can host it yourself. Just put in the location of the file where you host it in your web, in your project structure. So let's talk a little bit about the PyConfig tag, because it's, like I said, it's a very, very important thing in in developing PyScript. So the PyConfig tag actually is quite flexible. It gives you a few ways to write it. The default way is to write it in TOML format, because we have PyProject.toml, so it's kind of the Python community like this format. So the default is a TOML format like this. So yeah, this is a little bit different from the JSON format. So JSON format is more familiar with people. For example, if you have done some JavaScript before, this is kind of the favor of the JavaScript community is the JSON format. So this is you can also do that. Or if sometimes it looks very ugly if you have all these huge thing in your HTML file. If you want to separate them as much as possible, you can also call in a separate file. This is kind of in the same directory, but you can put it anywhere and then you can just load it in. And there are a few things you can do in PyConfig tag, and they are quite useful. For example, I've showed you before, you can load in packages. Is kind of important, otherwise you won't have any packages available for you to use with the Python code. That may not be what you want. And also, if it's not something, for example, NumPy, Pandas, or these things that that is already have a package that's available. Oh, by the way, so if the package, the will, we said is written. So if the library itself is developed in pure Python, and so there's nothing like a C plugin involved or anything like that, then it will be fine. You can just host the will, and then it will automatically be working with PyScript. But if it's not, then you probably need to check if they are available by the Pyodide project. Pyodide project provide a lot of, for example, NumPy is not written in pure Python. Also, other libraries, I think also Pandas also not, because using NumPy, so it's not written in pure Python. So those you have to check whether they're available by Pyodide. But usually the popular ones are, so you don't have to worry too much about it. But other than that, if you, for example, I write a local Python file, I want to load that in instead of a package that is available in public. It's just my local module that I've written for just this project. You can use fetch to fetch it in. So fetch is useful not just for loading in some local modules. You can also use fetch to load in some file. For example, you have a CSV file you want to load in. Again, how can the virtual machine find this CSV file if you don't put it in the virtual machine? So fetch is doing the same thing. It put all these Python file that you have written, or CSV file, or whatever file, an image file, just fetch them from wherever it is hosted, somewhere in the internet or in the server, fetch it and put it in the browser virtual machine. This is what fetch is used to do. You can also change the runtime setting. So PyScript is not just using PyLadies as the kind of a runtime backend. You can also change it to another one. For example, like another popular one could be MicroPython, because MicroPython is very lightweight version of Python, so it loads in very quickly. PyLadies is a bit heavy, and then also it provides lots of packages. So the good thing about PyLadies is that there are lots of packages available, but it's very heavy, so heavy weighted. So it takes some time to load. If you want to have a web application that basically, for example, just to teach kids how to do some basic Python, maybe MicroPython will be a better option for you. So you can change the runtime from PyLadies to MicroPython. You also add metadata there, the description, these licenses that, is not mega important to make the code run, but it's important when you have something you want to distribute, because people may want to know who write this code and whether they can use this code in some other, like what way they can use this code. So that's why the license is there. So this is also the very good feature that is provided by PyScript, is to have the PyRepo tag. So yeah, like I said, it's like Jupyter Notebook. Jupyter Notebook, you have the input bar that you can put in some Python code and then shift enter, then it will execute the code and give you the result. PyRepo is the same. You just need to put it in the HTML page, and then you can just generate that interactive Python interface. It's just like a Jupyter Notebook. Again, to make it look the appearance consistent, that's why we need the CSS file there. So this is how it looks like. You can just copy this 7 lines of code, put it in a file called something.html, and then open it on a browser. Then you can already start writing Python, right? You can just already use the PyRepo to write Python, and that's all you need to have Python running on your browser. Okay. So why is it useful? Like, why do we want to use PyScript? Well, like, why don't we just use JavaScript, right? Or like, oh, Jupyter Notebook is fine. Like, I don't need to. Why do I want to? Not use this new thing, right? Like, I think there's an advantage of this is because the difference between using PyScript and using, for example, a Jupyter Notebook. So a Jupyter Notebook is different from PyScript. It has a front end, so it's like where you put in your Python code and stuff. But when you run the code or something, that it would go back to a server. So a Jupyter Notebook will need a server to serve all the function. So remember, when you type the Jupyter Notebook on your terminal, it would have a lot of stuff print out, and that means that, well, you have started a server, and then the web page pop up and then you use it. So it's not like this. PyScript is purely run on your browser, so there's no backend that is needed. So sometimes, when you have an application that, for example, like Binder, right? Binder was very, very cool. It lets you to, deploy your Jupyter Notebook, and then you can, do some computational things. But then, like, everybody is using the same server to execute a code. So if the project becomes very, very popular, then, who is paying the bill of all this heavy computation, right? So if you have an application that, you need a server, and then the computation is very heavy for the server, then it could get expensive, and, sometimes you can't handle the traffic. But for example, PyScript, you don't need a server. You can just distribute your application with, sharing a web page. Then actually that, is easier for certain use cases. So also another thing is that, for example, we all heard this story, right? Like someone on GitHub Action is like, trying to like mine Bitcoin or something, and so because, again, GitHub provided this like server kind of applications. So at the end, GitHub is paying the bill for these people who like abuse it and use it for crypto mining. Then like you have to have a mechanism to stop people doing that, but otherwise, like, you're kind of, working for someone for free, right? You don't want to provide a playground for everybody to use. So using PyScript will minimize this risk because everything is run on the user's computer, their web browser specifically. So they're using the user is using their own resources rather than the server's resources, which like someone else who hosted is paying the bill. So that would be safer. People can't abuse it. So, you know, if people want to mine crypto with their own browser, it's their own problem, you know. And sometimes, you know, the user's data is too sensitive to leave the machine. I remember last year at the EuroSciPy, there was a presentation about scikit image, and some scikit image application that was shown as a lot of the part was actually need to be written in JavaScript because you know, that project is involving some like medical data, and the medical data is not like you can't really, for example, some medical images, because of the privacy of the client, of the patients, you can't really send those pictures through the internet to a server to process, because you're not supposed to have those data, like, you know, in your computer and process them. So, so the, you know, the patient's data can only stay on whatever the machine, for example, that doctor is using, because that's the only consensus is allowed. Then if your application is running on that like doctors, for example, the doctor's machine, then it doesn't, you know, violate the privacy or like data privacy of that particular person. So sometimes like this is the only way to do it. So we have to use something on the front end. So yeah, like with PyScript, with Django, if you're a web developer, it's like, oh, we all love Django. I also love Django. I love the community. No, of course not. Like, you know, I love both tools, but, you know, they are actually working together with each other, hand in hand, rather than competing. I would say there's totally two different things. If you're a Django user, you may actually try putting some PyScript in your template and start using PyScript. Yeah, they will work together just fine. No problem at all. And actually, someone did something very funny in the past. The DjangoCon Europe last year in Porto, someone gave a lightning talk. Actually, that someone is my friend Patrick. He gave a lightning talk of, like, you know, using PyScript to run Django. So basically, one browser become a server, and then you serve another web page, which is super crazy. And I tweeted it, and then you know, Anaconda CEO like Peter just like kind of, what's going on there? And then also like the PyScript team people are also like, wow, that's like, that's a bit crazy. So yeah, there's a bunch of crazy things you can do with PyScript. Right? Some of them are more useful, some of them are just like this, just absurd and very weird. Yeah, so if you want to look at more PyScript examples, more simpler and more straightforward ones, go to PyScript.net examples. You will see a lot of use case. You can even inspect the source code. That's also sometimes how I found a solution of how to do things, because the examples show you how to do it. So it's really good. Another thing that I provide is the PyScript tutorial. Oh, actually, I have my own version here. Just I forgot to change it. So yeah, this one is actually maintained by the Anaconda people. But I have my own version of it now, because this one is maintained by me. It's just two different kind of thing, because it kind of diverged afterwards. So I decided to maintain my own, which is fine. So yeah, you can go to this one. It's just like there are 3 chapters. There's like from how to use PyScript, how to use PyScript, from the basic, you know, nothing, to like making your first application, into the second one, which is like you do some data visualization, and the third one is to deploy a recommendation engine, which is very fun. So have a look at that if you are interested. And now is the Q&A. Well, before we go to Q&A with you, I have some questions that I collect in the past that it may be your question. That's why I'm kind of showing it here now, or it inspire you to ask further questions. It's also welcome. So, for example, could you put in the Python script? Yes, you can. You can use fetch, like I said before. Please check the documentation of PyScript, and you'll see how fetch work. There's also these, Python version. Some people like really want to know what Python version you're using, because, you know, something is not supported in different versions of Python. So you can actually pin the version of the runtimes at runtime, but, you know, you have to double check if the Python version is actually the one that you want. Sometimes like what PyodIde is using, you have to like go deeper. So I know I'm using this version of PyodIde, but what what is this, the Python version of this Pyodide, you have to dive deeper to find it. Okay, so next one is, yeah, why is like PyScript and tag equals to, why is the script tag is Python? Is like, because like script tag equals to Python, so it's like more kind of similar to what JavaScript is doing. So, but why is it not this way? But why we need a Py and then that dash and then script? Because how things got working is we are using a custom tag in the HTML file, so the browser will interpret it differently according to what is set. But script, the tag script itself is not a custom tag and is already like, fixated to only work with JavaScript and things like that. So unfortunately, we can't do it yet. Maybe if PyScript gets super popular, we can do that. I don't know. I can't predict the future. Also, like, oh, why are we like writing PyScript but not using Pyodide? I would say that like because PyScript is very easy to use compared to Pyodide. Pyodide is providing a lot of kind of API that you can, maybe passing like some Python object into some JavaScript object, JavaScript object into Python object, but still not as convenient as just having two tags and then inside you can just write Python code, right? So PyScript is more straightforward, and also you can change the runtime. It doesn't, doesn't need to be only Pyodide. It could be other things as well. So, can you pin a package version? Right now, there's no easy way to pin it, but what you can do is to download the view that you want and then host it yourself. Then it will always be that version. So, for some of you who have heard of a project called Python, Python is actually a so it's like C Python, but instead of C, it's JavaScript. So it's interpreting Python into JavaScript. So what's the difference? So PyScript actually didn't, like, PyScript itself doesn't involve any JavaScript because it's like the graph I showed you before is got in Pyodide interpreted, or Pyodide, or the MicroPython and Scripton version or whatever that you choose the runtime is actually interpreting Python into WASM. So it kind of doesn't use JavaScript. So it's this different, and also PyScript, thanks to Pyodide, provide lots of packages which JavaScript doesn't have. So yeah, it will be much easier to use than Python, I think, in my opinion. Yeah, also, yeah, like I said, it's multiple backend. You can choose, using different things. I think now they are trying to also support other languages as well, which is super cool. But I don't know much about that side. You have to like maybe dig deeper yourself or ask the team. So yeah, now is the time for your question. So I'm gonna have a look at all these questions on the chat and see whether I can answer your question. So. And does PyScript support only a subset of functionality of Django? Is it fully functional? What level of corporate doesn't exist today for PyScript? Okay. So first, there's multiple questions here. So first question, so I think you're talking specifically about that example that I showed before. So that is actually a fun example. There's like this is just a absurd, like the name suggests, absurd Django. It's just a, some kids was playing with something, right? It's not something that normally people would do. So no, you won't use PyScript to, you won't use Django in PyScript. But what you can do is that, for example, you have a Django project, you have the templates, right? So you can put some PyScript in your template, and then instead of JavaScript or something, then it will run Python code. Yeah, yeah, you think of it as like, instead of JavaScript, now you can write Python script and also use some Python libraries if you want, within your Django project. Yeah, so for this absurd Python, I don't know whether it's fully functional. It's a bit crazy. You can check it out yourself. It's just like, it was presented in a lightning talk, and it's just very wow. That's what it is. What level of, yeah, so like for commercial application, I don't know any yet, but maybe someone have done it but haven't like reached me yet, so I don't know. But I've seen a lot of cool example of people, usually younger coders, that they are creating a lot of fun stuff with PyScript, and So that could be something, for education maybe, because, young coder can just start coding quite easily without the setup and understanding how Python works deeply and stuff like that. Another thing I've seen that got used is, for example, documentation. Some documentation, like I said, like documentation sites, they may want people to try it out, but you don't want to build a sandbox that anybody can come in and try something that they are not supposed to do. So they can try out, for example, a Python library without installing it. So they can just run some code on the browser to try some functionality. So that is something that is used by the open source community. It's not commercial use. Regarding job hunting, I think, the more of course, you won't be saying like, oh, you have to hire me because I'm a PyScript expert. I think it's not there yet. PyScript is still a very young project, but I think, as I would always recommend people, especially developers who are at the early stage of their career, to explore and learn more things, because it will help you in the future for developing your career, like what kind of thing you want to focus on when you go to more like senior level. So give it a try. It may not directly get your job, but I think it's also a good thing to learn. So another question: if PyConfig is pulling in the packages, what is the performance or duration impact? Yes, so that's a very good question. It may actually make your page load slower if you have a lot of project that you put in the PyConfig. I think your thought is right. Like, you need to be, put on the VM. And also the virtual machine has limited memory. It only got 4 GB of memory. So if you try to pull in all the library in Python that's available, then you will run out of memory and it will be very, very slow to load. So don't do that. Only loading things that you needed. That's always the rule of thumb. For project I would usually do with Django, can I do all of the same thing using PyScript? I would say no, because, for example, right? So what Django provides is you have a database, you have a state that it will be persistent. For PyScript, because everything is done on the browser, it would it need to use the VM, and then there's some caches, like, for example, like you have a very heavy, loading a lot of libraries in a page, and if you refresh, then it will be a little bit quicker this time. The second time you refresh it, because it's got cached, but this cache is not a good way to store any data that need to be persistent. That's why you can't replace Django with PyScript. No. For some small application, for example, like data visualization or some small things, you can. Like I said, I would suggest people to use, for example, you have a Django project, you can, maybe replace some of these like front-end functionality that you normally do with JavaScript with PyScript, or add some functionality that, for example, visualization and this stuff, you can do it purely with Python. But anything that you need a store, you need a state, Django did a really good job. Like you can spin up a SQLite database very easily. You can have admin to control that as well. So no, you can't really replace Django with PyScript. No, I don't think so. And I think even in the future, they both got their space, so it won't be something that one is replacing the other. So yeah, I think that's it for everything, and maybe I'll stop presenting and